to everyone who's watching. My name is Laura, and I am joined today by one of the lectors here at Aeroclass, John Ingram. So we're gonna have a little chat about John's experience, his thoughts on aviation, and also, of course, Aeroclass. And for those who are not aware, Aeroclass is a new virtual learning platform for aviation specialists, and it is John who is gonna be on the other side of your screen teaching you new things. So John, thanks a lot for agreeing to sit down with me.
Sure. Yeah.
Great
pleasure.
stuff. So as I already mentioned, Aeroclass is a platform for aviation specialists, and I guess it kind of goes without question that you yourself are a true expert in this area.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far, Lena. How did it come into my life? Well, you may guess from the way I'm speaking that I'm from the UK. I grew up just west of Heathrow, the main airport outside London. So I guess you could say from a very early age, the sound of aircraft, the sight of aircraft whizzing overhead my house was very much part of my life. I didn't feel at that stage as a young guy running around I necessarily would join an airline. But no, I went to university up in Manchester, studied geography. I was always interested in travel, always interested in different places, different people. And at the end of studies, I was fortunate. I had 2 or 3 options, and one of them I applied for was British Airways. So fell into it, shall we say, and joined BA. And then off I went on my journey, which thankfully continues because it's fun. It's a fun industry today.
Indeed, and from your CV, people can see that you have many years of experience. And as you mentioned, you started off with British Airways, and now you went into consulting. Obviously, you know, and even in your course, you mentioned that aviation is never boring. So are there any particular appointments or roles that stand out for you in your experience?
I think for me, like most people, you always think back to the first couple of, kind of assignments, shall we say. And I was very lucky. I have been lucky. I was seconded, in fact, out of British Airways to work for a handling agent, an airport handling agent in the Sultanate of Oman in Muscat, Sib Airport. And that was a very formative experience for me because a whole lot of reasons. One, you were dealing with a lot of different airlines, from the small to the large, shall we say. We had, in those days, British Airways 747s coming up from Australia, Singapore, and then through to the UK. We had Gulf Air, we had PIA, we had a whole range of other stuff, shall we say, flying around, including military. So it was a very broad introduction to not just one airline, which for me, I think, kind of set my brain in a way because it made me think outside of my own immediate environment. Secondly, it gave me a real feel for international, cross-cultural aspects, and managing across cultures and understanding across cultures, particularly if you're on airlines, is really important. And so in my 20s at a young age, when you have that opportunity, it's invaluable, frankly. And I think the other one, I've had to pick another one, was maybe I was fortunate enough to be sent back to university. Studied Mandarin Chinese for just over a year, full-time in the UK. And then I was sent, actually, funnily enough, I was sent to Khartoum, typical corporate, when I finished the course for a couple of months, I think to bring me back to reality. And then I went off to China for the first time for about 3 years as airport manager in Beijing. And that was in the 80s, so it was just opening up. So a very dynamic environment. A lot of training, funnily enough. So I was heavily involved in training staff there to handle Western equipment, Western aircraft from a ground handling perspective, and also concepts and reality of customer service and dealing with customers. So I think those would be, if I had to pick on a couple of, how can I put it, experiences that shaped my outlook on life. Those would be two that'd be 2 standouts, definitely.
And it definitely sounds impressive. And you also touched upon cross-cultural importance, and you mentioned that you work, in various corners of the world. Are there any regional differences to the community in aviation?
I think you're going to have regional differences anyway. I think I may attack that kind of another way. I think there are a lot of commonalities around people in the business in terms of their passion for people and dealing with customers. On the one hand, obviously you have the operational side as well, but it's a very much yes, you've got lots of high-tech equipment. Obviously, safety is your number one priority. In addition, though, I think the commonalities are around the ability and the passion for dealing with people. Yes, then there are differences. In the context, I think you find yourself, depending on your role, and you may be in economies or cultures where, when you say cultures, organizational culture, shall we say, which may be very state-orientated versus maybe more private sector. And there may be differences in regulatory approaches which kind of come out of different attitudes from a governmental perspective in terms of how they see an airline. So is it a strategic asset to be protected at all costs? On kind of one, you could take sort of one extreme. On the other extreme is it a free-for-all? So I think you have to develop as an international manager an ability to deal with those different things. But first and foremost, you have to listen, and you have to have empathy for the different cultural aspects you're going to deal with. I think that's the other key thing that you learn that comes through very strongly.
I see. And of course, with all this experience, at least for me, it's no surprise that someone would go into teaching to kind of share that knowledge with with others. Was your transition to teaching easy, or did you face any challenges or anything like that?
I think there are a number of, I think the baseline, I think, in any form of teaching, whatever you're kind of teaching, shall we say, you have to be passionate about your topic. If you're not passionate about your topic, then it's not going to happen. And all of us have sat in sessions where we were being taught, shall we say, where somebody will just drone on and they won't really have that passion for the topic. So I think that's a start point. You have to not just be doing it as a job. You've got to have passion for what your subject matter is. When it comes to engaging with people, obviously my first experiences were in the corporate world, really, delivering training to, as I mentioned to you, could it be handling agent staff or sales staff, whatever. And I was also quite heavily involved with mentoring managers, junior managers coming through the system, coming through the organization, or indeed getting into how do you actually help people who are going to work into different cultures, or coming back into a head office environment. So I was very fortunate. I had a lot of different experiences, shall we say, which were not just straight commercial deliverable. So when it came to the opportunity to move out of the corporate world, sort of about 10 years ago, I switched into doing 3 or 4 things, one of which was very much on the kind of the teaching side. And initially, IATA, actually, International Air Transport Association, were kind enough to ask me and engage with me in terms of could I do a bit of training in various places, which appealed to me because I could still travel, I could meet different cultures. And then that kind of rolled on to academic side of life, various universities. I live near a university here in Guildford, actually, University of Surrey. And so there's the academic bit, shall we say. And then getting into sort of, you mentioned consultancy, I do a little bit of that, have done a little bit of that for some airlines, mainly around change. And then I do some charity work as well, which again links into training as well. So the transition, I think I was ready for a change, let's put it that way, to move out of the kind of the corporate world, shall we say. And so the initial shift into teaching wasn't seamless, but it wasn't, I felt very positive about it. I think the big change has been obviously in the last sort of 12, 18 months, which is having to learn new skills in terms of delivering virtual training, which is very, very different.
Now, it's perfect that you just mentioned that, because I was gonna kind of move towards e-learning specifically.
Yep.
And I kind of want to hear your opinion. What is possibly missing in the current supply that we have for aviation e-learning specifically?
I think it's going through a lot of change, is it not, for everybody? And I think one thing is it easily accessible? Number one. Is it accessible? Is the content engaging? Or is it just somebody trying to get a stack of PowerPoints and put them onto a virtual format, so-called? Because that's obviously not going to work. And I think the other thing is, how can you maintain people's attention, interest into what you're talking about on various topics? And you will hear different debates about how many minutes you can keep somebody's attention or not. I think for me, it's more around, can you design something and make it engaging, make it informative? Can it create interest in, say, some of the initial level of understanding? But that can then generate more in-depth courses, or more kind of blended learning moving forwards, where you may have not just a virtual delivery, but you may also can link it to in-class delivery in the future. So I think in all of those areas, there's a lot of redesign happening. And it's, to my feel, is it's a bit patchy, shall we say. And I think for those of us who, and yourself, everybody's lived on Teams or Zoom for the last 12 months. And I think the love affair with Zoom and Teams has waned, shall we say. But I think from the training angle, it's very much about making it engaging, making it interactive, which you can do, and also ensuring that it gets that energy into people, that they're saying, oh, actually, this is an interesting area. I want to dive deeper. And you need to have that linkage between the different steps so that it flows.
Yeah, and I guess it'd be weird not to mention Aeroclass at this point, because that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is to give an opportunity for people to learn, anywhere, at any time, at their own pace, and give them this great technology, which will certainly help them, or make the learning process kind of user-friendly, and in general, just nice and interesting, and kind of engaging for everyone. And obviously, you as a lecturer will be a part of that for our students. I just wanted to know what attracted you to Aeroclass specifically.
I think, to be frank, I think what is, for me, always interesting is having a relationship and dealing with an organization which is fresh. In other words, there are no preconceived ways of doing things. And that attracts me, because it enables you to try out different things, as you mentioned, different technologies, and it also forces you to really think about how can you improve what you're doing. And where you have an organization that is relatively new, which is looking to develop into a new area, there's a tremendous amount of energy. And I can certainly feel, I'm not just saying this to be nice, I personally, and I'm sure the other instructors are the same, there is an energy there, and that is something which you can't just pull off the shelf. And therefore, enabling one to be part of that, I think, is very important. So in short form, I think it's about having the opportunity to design something different, and to learn from something different.
I'm glad to hear that.
No, I mean that as well, genuinely. It's refreshing.
I'll take it as a compliment throughout the whole team, for the whole team, so thank you.
Okay.
And John, I'm giving the floor to you right now for you to kind of introduce your course specifically that you will be presenting. So introduce it, what audience is it aimed at, and what can one expect from it?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm involved with is really giving a introductory level of understanding of the aviation scene. That's really the simplest way I can put it. And I think there are a number of takeouts that people will have. first and foremost, they'll have an awareness of the importance of aviation and how it affects everything in terms of, the global economy, economics, social, in terms of tourism, social interaction. And crucially, the way that aviation is linked to so many things. And where you have linkage, you have opportunity. And particularly right now, where we're going through, as a business, a massive external shock to the system. Yes, that is difficult, but it's like anything. It can act as an accelerator for change. And I think, so you'll definitely get an awareness of the overall scope of aviation. You'll get an up-to-date feel for the current challenges and more particularly opportunities that exist within aviation. And I think also it'll give stimulus for people to, when they've been through the introductory modules, it'll give them a stimulus to dig deeper, to sort of dive in more depth to some topics, which obviously those modules are going to be forthcoming as well. So it will certainly, and the other thing I'd say is it's not just geared for airline people. It's not just geared for airlines, because it's just as valid, particularly for, be it ground handlers at airports, IT providers, to give people an understanding of the business. Because one thing I find is, you use that horrible phrase, you have different silos, and you'll find the different silos of businesses don't talk to each other necessarily. And what this course is designed to do is to give you that overview, that framework, and you can see the matrix of linkages that exist, and you can see the opportunities, not just on a local organizational level, but globally. And there are plenty of examples in the content to provoke people to think about those things.
So as you mentioned, it's not necessarily for aviation people specifically, but kind of for those who are interested in the linkage between the businesses.
I think it is. And I think it could also, from previous experience, I think it's also just as valid for people in government, for people in different industries who may not even be aware, frankly, of what goes on in the aviation industry, be it from catering suppliers, engineering, fuel, aircraft, banks, insurance, banking, again, insurance, broking, leasing. Yeah. There are so many angles where an enhanced understanding of what it's about, shall we say, can actually trigger that light bulb moment that says, hold on, there might be an opportunity here for me to start digging and actually, I didn't think of that linkage to that business or to that business. And also the other thing it does is it gives you a feel to really think carefully and almost brainstorm in terms of, well, how are things moving? How are they changing? Where are industries relocating? How are supply chains changing, which we all know is a big issue at the moment? How is that going to affect air freight? How is that going to affect travel? How is it going to affect business travel? You hear lots of different stories in terms of impact. But how can you look at forecasting, and how's that going to change? What are the needs of airlines for different forecasting tools? It gives you that initial level of understanding. It doesn't attempt to go into the detailed deep dive, but it certainly gives you a very good understanding.
And I guess it's especially relevant these days, given the whole COVID kind of background, when aviation, I guess, is one of the industries that were hit the most.
Yep.
And you actually talk about that in your course, and you mentioned some specific examples, but just to get a little glimpse into your module for our viewers, how successful were the airlines in adapting to this new world order post-COVID?
I think a couple of things here. Don't underestimate how adaptable the business is. Okay. This is not the first crisis the business has been through, and it probably won't be the last. Okay. As a kind of a get-go, I sort of put it in context. In terms of reaction, obviously you go through different phases. aviation is actually fairly unique in terms of being highly susceptible to external shocks to the system, be it maybe a fuel price hike or an economic recession or a major incident, or as we have now, a coronavirus. And I think those airlines, there are different responses, but fundamentally, you are having to look at survival in the initial phases of this one. So it's conserving your cash. Secondly, you've got to look about, well, how do I reset the business? Do I just go back to what I was? No. Well, what do I want to do? And then how am I going to rebuild? And I think there are a number of things to think about. Firstly, what was the state of my business when I went into the problem? And there are widely differing statuses of different airlines. Some were financially strong, some were financially weak. How quickly, though, can people adapt? And I think it's this ability to adapt, which is important. One word I hate to just use so much, agile. You hear in my career, you have buzzword after buzzword. I think there is a fundamental truth in here, though, which is how quickly can you respond, but also how up for change is your business and how well can you adapt. And a lot of that also comes down to how are you looking at sources of information, particularly new sources of information when it comes, say, to trying to forecast demand, and how are you able to look at both the immediate term, but how is it going to affect the structure of your business model, and how is it going to affect, frankly, the assets you need? They can be the physical assets, the type of aircraft. You've seen airlines simplifying their fleets, but that's the kind of physical side of things. What about the human side of things? So how are you going to be able to maybe change the productivity of your human assets in terms of what they do, what they're trained, what their capabilities are? And what if you're taking a 0 to 5 years out, how are you going to rapidly look at how you roll that through? So there are a variety of different responses. Some are more successful than others. And I think the last thing I'd say is, obviously, there's been a lot of government support. And obviously one question there is, does that support enable change and survival, or is that support simply embedding inefficiencies, shall we say, in some airlines, where they're just going to use that money maybe to create an almost dysfunctional marketplace, which would not necessarily be healthy. So it's a complex scenario, set of scenarios, let's put it that way. But that makes it fun. It makes the industry fun, frankly, dealing with it. It's, as I said, it's never boring. And if you're an airline staff member, you know this. It's never boring.
And I guess, ironically, it's a learning process for them as well. These current days, they have to evolve, they have to adapt. And for some people, that might be harder, for some easier. And I guess you can, talk more about this with the students in your course, and I'm sure they'll learn even more things and interesting things. Well, John, thanks once again for your time, for your thoughts. I really enjoyed it. And I hope everyone did just as well. And if you're interested, you can join the Aeroclass virtual classroom and see John in your screen. And of course, we'll be waiting for you. So thanks, John, again. I really appreciate it.
No, I really enjoy talking with you, and I'll hopefully enjoy interacting and talking with other people as we go forwards. Okay.
Absolutely. All right, then take care. Bye.
Okay.
And thank you.
Bye. Cheers.